Hello, hello, hello. I am Cruellica Kain, and this week I'm here again with
Advent Nebula.
And I know it's been a little bit, and that is due to the fact that life gets crazy.
Especially on my end right now, which I'm having fun with medical issues.
Yeah, so even though we're still kind of a brand new baby podcast, we wanted to take a little bit of a break to make sure that Advent was healthy, and we're starting to get there, which is a good thing, so yay!
I'm just waiting on when I'm going to finally have my surgery, which is still an unknown right now.
Yeah, but positive horizons, so think positive thoughts for Advent Nebula, even though this is a person named Cruellica saying it. But nevertheless, we wanted to kind of get back on track, and one of the episodes that we wanted to do was on one of our not all-time favorite series, because it's just one of those series that's almost in the threshold of anime and manga fandoms.
Yep. Been going strong for almost 30 years with the manga.
Almost 40, actually, because it started in the 80s.
In the 80s. But its 25th anniversary is where it really kicked off when the Western fandom, when it's finally got its true anime adaptation in 2012 with Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency.
And the show that we're talking about is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And kind of, before we get into the meat of the topic, Advent Nebula and one of our other friends, Bloodborne Chrysalis, or Chrysalis Bloodborne, I can never figure out what he wants to go by, they both have always known about JoJo. So it was one of those things that was always talked about in their home. But I myself, Kaiji Okami, and Silver Quill had no clue what they're talking about. First time I had seen the characters, I hesitated, wanted to run far, far away, because it kind of reminded me of Fist of the North Star, but more flamboyant.
And there really is a charm to the artwork in a way. It is on that flamboyant but macho side that eventually progressed as the times went and the artwork progressed with it.
It did. It's kind of like if you think about with Sailor Moon or with Dragon Ball. You can actually see how the dynamic of the characters have changed models-wise over the years. So when I finally got a chance to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I clearly saw very, very quickly, and even reading the manga, what the love for it was. I can't say that actually I probably am to the level of a fan that you are, but it's one of those series that definitely is out there, and it actually has a lot of interesting topics. So we wanted to take on to the therapy chair session this episode with looking at the three core Joestars, and that would be Jonathan Joestar, who started it all, Joseph Joestar, who is his grandson, and Jotaro Kujo, who is Joseph Joestar's grandson. And Jonathan Joestar's great grandson.
Which kind of comes back to a little irony when you consider whose body Dio took.
Exactly, which we will be doing additional episodes depending on the interest of us talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Because we do want to do an episode on bastards, which I know is a terrible term, but being a bastard, I feel like I can own it, going into Giorno and Josuke, and then another episode talking about girl power with the only female Joestar in the series that's actually led the series.
And then finally, whenever she gets around to it, reading Steel Ball Run,
yes, I'm
Johnny and Gyro. Because Gyro's kind of not a Joestar, but their story is so intertwined, the two of them together kind of have to have their story told.
Absolutely. No, it's an interesting concept, and the reason why I also haven't gotten into that yet is because I know it's kind of almost like a culture shift with the series. So, with going for the three Joestars, we were talking about this earlier, like how we would categorize three main Joestars. And the reason why we still consider Jotaro a Joestar is because technically he embodies every single element. His grandfather, his great-grandfather, George Joestar, who never has appeared in the show, as well as Jonathan himself. So, going into that, Jonathan Joestar we looked at as, first and foremost, compassion and naivete.
Exactly. He didn't grow up with a mother because when he was still a baby, his mother died and he was raised by his father. And his father ended up owing a debt to the man who saved him. Unfortunately, the said man who saved his life was a drunk jerk that beat his son, and after his death, ends up taking in Dio, the son of the man whose debt he was owed. And it ends up creating a very interesting dynamic with a surrogate brother who just happens to end up wanting to take the money and the inheritance for himself, and it becomes to the point where it's almost too late by the time Jonathan realizes what plan has been hatched.
And what I really value, Jonathan Joestar is admittedly my least favorite Joestar. And I think not because he's so compassionate or naive. I actually think those are admirable qualities to have for anyone. And when you go into that therapeutic manner, you want someone to have compassion. Especially when you're looking at the fact that his father did bring in Dio as his surrogate brother to help him, to give him a leg up. And Jonathan looked at it the same way. He would give the shirt off his back. He gave his home. He gave his dog's life. He gave the love of his life. He gave so much to create that relationship. And I think the biggest fault I have for Jonathan, that if he could reflect on this, and he's only 21 by the time his story ends, so he is incredibly young. So it's not something that, whereas where Joseph and Jotaro are also equally young when their stories appear, he's a kid.
Yeah.
He's watched so much happen, and I will say the naivete is probably due to the fact that he did have a lot in life. And this is one thing that, being a person who has not had that much at times, there is that, I can feel for what Dio was going through. There is that jealousy. There is that unfairness of the world.
Yeah, Dio really wanted to have the life he felt he was never granted until he actually got into the Joestar household, and he took advantage of that, and it led to the death of Jonathan's father, and ended up eventually leading to Dio becoming a vampire.
It did, and it led to, spoiler alert if you know nothing about it, because if he's a great-great-grandfather of somebody, that means he's no longer around, unless we're not even going to talk about that, but still. Yeah.
We can bring that up when we talk about Gerono.
Well, exactly. But the fact of the matter is, his naivete and his looking at the world with rose-colored glasses is a horrible thing. When you talk to anyone who's going through emotional issues, or even when I'm coaching someone at work, you always see those individuals that looks at everything like shiny, happy people. R.E.M. killed it with that song. And you want someone to kind of grow from that. And while Dio kind of was starting to demonstrate that to Jonathan really had this barrier of unwillingness, because he wanted to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. That's why I think he became friends with the Zappellis and the Speedwagons.
And that's why he met Irena and become married to her at such a young age.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of positives to having a significant amount of compassion, which is the one thing I love about Jonathan Joestar. His naivete made me want to strangle him every single time I read a chapter or watched the anime.
Exactly, because in the end, it led to his death on the boat on the way to America.
And it's a really good explanation of, we don't want people to be hardened to the world, which we will get to a character like that in this conversation. But we do want a character And we want it ourselves as human beings. And this is a great allegory for the real world. Everyone is naive. No matter how hardened you are to the world, how pessimistic you are on everything, everyone is naive about something. But you have to be careful of how naive you can be. And Jonathan is a great example of, and it's a real world thing that can happen. You can be so naive, you can have terrible things happen in the end.
Exactly. And in the end, it costs, like I said, it costs him his life. But on the same page is the sole reason he was able to fight and defeat Dio earlier on and cause Dio to lose his head
Is due to his compassion.
Yep.
His compassion for others also gave him something that you see with all of the Joestars and all of the main JoJos of all of the series, is this unending strength, this unending will to persevere beyond what you can do. And Jonathan really exemplified that. I would say more so than Joseph or Jotaro.
Yeah, he surely did.
He did. His compassion allowed him, while he did have the rose-colored glasses, and he admits this in his story, that he was naive. But he has just such strength of will. And it's a great thing to have, especially when you're watching something like anime. Most people think anime is flippant because we have a ton of series like that. Even our more serious animes, like even Attack on Titan, that goes on very strong allegories, if you look in between, can be very flippant. And we like that. We want anime like Dr. Stone or Attack on Titan or Full Metal Alchemist or any of those types of shows. But when you have a series like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that you wouldn't expect this from, and you get such strong and compelling narrative, it proves why it's lasted the test of time.
Yeah.
Because it started with Jonathan's story, and Jonathan's story proved that it was a great model, it was a great storytelling, and if you think about it, the European audiences also could see the value in Jonathan.
Yeah, Europe has had the manga available in Italy and in France well before it even came over here to America. And it's just a test of the fact they got it sanctioned over from the beginning. Where we at first just got Stardust Crusaders, and that was all we really ever
OVA,
knew.
yeah.
For the OVA and the original manga to release when it was released in the mid-2000s was just Stardust Crusaders.
Which, so, at the end, as a pop culture therapy chair, I would say for a character like Joseph Joestar, or Jonathan Joestar, sorry, there's too many J's. I know that's the point. But still, for Jonathan Joestar, I would, if he was able to reflect on his life, I would at least say, be a little bit more cognizant of people, and while you want to give others the benefit of the doubt,
And you'll give anybody the shirt off your back.
have a little bit more caution. What would you think?
Yeah, you got to have the caution. Also, I'd look at them and go, look, sometimes you got to realize people that didn't grow up on the social level you did have a very different outlook on life than you do. Try and actually look at it from their perspective, and maybe then you'll be able to understand why Dio looks at the world the way he does.
And yes, we will have a therapy chair session for Dio Brando on his own, but we're not going to get into it this time. But yes, Jonathan Joestar, we thank you for what you've done for the Joestar family, and we wish we could have seen more from you, because it would have been interesting to see how you would have taken on America.
Now we go on to Joseph, who, ironically, when you look at him at the beginning of the series, when he first bursts in, that's a 15-year-old kid.
He is what I call an idiot savant. If you're not sure what an idiot savant is, depending on if you've heard the term or not, if you watch a movie Trick or Treat, that's where it's like popular and it's funny to hear it like that. But an idiot savant is actually someone who technically is incredibly smart, but is either socially inept, socially awkward, or can have some kind of like idiotic tendencies. I know you don't want to put anything with a disability with the term idiotic, but idiotic was never always meant to be a terrible thing. It was kind of a representation of a person. And so an idiot savant is somebody who's a genius, but they just don't know how to represent it. And he is a perfect example because he's like Sherlock Holmes, if you think of the Robert Downey Jr. movies. Plan out every action and then be a cocky ass with it all at the same time.
And he'll play with people. He'll get them to actually say what he wants them to say just for the sake of fooling them to have the upper hand.
And he is, comparatively between the three Joestars, he is, I would say egotistical, but it's more of that young, brash cockiness.
Because we are talking about a 15-year-old here.
I thought he was older than that, but he is very, very young. He is extremely young. He is extremely silly. And if you really want to get an idea of like how silly he is, when he is tasked essentially with saving the world
from an Aztec god of fitness, as what I like to call the Pillarmen.
Oh God, the Pillarmen. They were the first pictures I had seen of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. 18 years old. But still, they were the first pictures of what I had seen for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In their loincloths and their, like, Fist of the North Star outfits. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not entirely sure of this show. Because you have characters like Cars, Wamu, or I'm just going to go Cars, Wham, AC/DC,
and Santana.
So you have 4 big top musicians of the 70s and 80s. If you really don't know who Cars, Wham, Santana, or AC/DC are, please Google them. Jokingly enough, if you've watched the Spider-Man Far From Home, the band that Peter Parker says, "Oh, I love Led Zeppelin," is AC/DC. Just as a reminder for all of you kids out there. But Wham is George Michael, Cars has Gary Newman, and Santana, he is the greatest guitarist in the world.
And AC/DC is like, which lead singer, considering the time period?
Well, exactly. But they're all great bands, and that's the one thing I love about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And a quick side note is the fact that it does reference so much music that for a person like me who is a music nerd, having all of these different bands in a show is like a cavalcade of like, yes, this is my life.
But going back to Joseph, I think very early on you see his hyper-intelligence when he fights Straits on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yes. I will say Straits there, but you also have it even earlier on when he is...
Saving Smokey?
I was going to say saving Smokey. How he planned this entire action. I don't want to really spoil anything for anyone who's not seen the series, but he plans out, and you don't actually know he's planned anything out until you actually watch it play out and then kind of watch his reaction when he gets caught in the act of being told he planned it out.
Or when his plan has failed on the few occasions.
And then when you find out when he's training, that's another element of you can see the cockiness and the idiot savant actions working together. Because being that he's an 18-year-old kid, he's very cocky, which admittedly, when you are that age, man, woman, whatever, you are extremely cocky because you are old enough to know a lot, but still young enough to try stupid stuff. And so when he's trying to train to defeat Wamu, as he's called because of how it's done for copyrights, you can see how his ego and the idiot side of the savant action is compelling him to constantly make mistakes because he thinks he has it, and then when it comes to the savant side where he utilizes his intelligence, where he actually reflects on action along with everything else and sees where he's making the mistakes, he's able to regroup and reset. And the reason why we're talking more so about battle tendencies, Joseph Joestar, is because that's where you really see him develop as a person.
Yeah. By the time Star Wars Crusaders rolls around, the few episodes dedicated to him is already a fully grown, fleshed out character, so you already know what to expect at that point.
But even then, you can still see how he is so much like himself. And that's the one thing I have to admit that Gundam H failed on.
Yeah.
That JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has done right. And that is showcasing a character in one series as the main, as the young, developing himself. And you really see that with Joestar on that aspect. You see him starting to develop and seeing how his actions cost him. And they cost him terribly, with a death of a very good friend, and then the handicap he receives through his actions. And then watching how this develops, and then taking it next step where you see him as a grandfather. He's a grandfather, he's had a child, he's built a business, he's lived a life, he's seen more loss, but he's seen more gain at the same time. And you see all of this playing together, and you sit back and you're like, wow, this character, even though we haven't seen 50 years of his life or 40 years of his life on screen, we've seen so much happen.
Yeah, you actually see, when he gets back into the picture, you can actually believe what happened to him in the last 40 years actually happened, because it made it like he would develop naturally from where he was at 18 to where he is at 52.
Exactly. So he develops so much, and for me, Joseph Joestar was for a very long time my favorite Joestar, and he still is one of my top favorites. Not that there's many to escalate to, but still for the JoJos, because I respect him. He is very intelligent, even though he's come from a life of wealth, just like his grandfather. He actually does something very different, kind of on that opposite spectrum. While he has the wealth, he has never utilized it to take advantage of it. Not that Jonathan did, but Jonathan had it where it was kind of part of ingrained into his daily life, where Joseph tried to separate that from him.
Yeah. Now, I am going to be spoiling something, because with his character, every character like this has some sort of fault.
Oh, yes.
And his fault is being having, like a lot of these characters tend to do, even in real life, a midlife crisis, which led to an affair while he was teaching business in Japan.
And his affair was pretty much this is going to kind of lead into our next JoJo, or Joestar, which is Jotaro, which will kind of sidetrack but get back into Joseph. So this was around the time he went to Japan because of the events in Stardust Crusaders, which is part 3, which is what Jotaro leads. And it was around that time he has an affair, and which leads to our first bastard, which we will get into that later. Because it really does help with Jotaro's story.
And also helps you understand Joseph on his hatred of the Japanese, because his daughter, the time he's teaching in Japan, gets married to a musician.
So his daughter's name is Holly. And the reason we want to reference that is because Joseph, being that he has these two dueling things, which truthfully, idiot savants and egotistical people are not very rarely meshed together as one type of combined individual. Because usually most idiot savants are awkward. Now you do have those sorts that have the ego aspect involved, and that kind of is like a counterbalance. Think of it, there's a way to think of it. Think of extroverts. There is actually a thing, which I am, there's extroverts who are actually socially awkward. And what that means is not that you don't like people, it's just you have different ways of being able to translate it. You either have that aggressive nature, or you have that very muted nature. I'm very aggressive, which is what helped me enjoy Joseph, because he is also that way. So if you don't want to think of it as idiot savant, if you're uncomfortable with that term, you can think of egotistical, socially awkward. He knows what he's doing. He does not know how to translate it. And the people who do connect with him so well, like Caesar, Lisa, which kind of has no choice, but still.
Susie Q,
as well as even Stroheim. And Stroheim, I wish we need to dedicate an episode for him. But nevertheless, before I get sidetracked, when you have the characters that do connect with him so well, even Smokey does, it's because they can see beyond the veneer of the ego and the awkwardness. And if I were to look at it as one thing if I were to sit in front of Joseph and say, being one socially awkward extrovert to another, I would probably say, know your audience. Know who you're talking to, because that's the one biggest fault about Joseph, even as an adult in the later series. He does not slow down. He is at 150% an extra every single time. And I understand saying somebody's extra in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is an oxymoron, but he is. He's probably the most extra of all the Joestars.
Yes. And he was sitting down in front of me, I literally tell him, and I know it's going to be hard for you, but just dial back and assess the situations of the people you're around instead of over-analyzing the situation. It makes people uncomfortable.
Now, another fault that Joseph does have is, yes, he has compassion, not to the same degree of his grandfather, Jonathan, which he never knew, so he would have never understood that compassion outside of what his grandmother told him. But he does, when he loves someone, he is all in. And that's the one thing I have to say, it's a fault, because if you look at his daughter, Holly is, by the time we see her, because he's older than 50, he's like closer to 58, she's 40 years old. And I'm nearing that, but still, she acts like she's 20. And it's because her father loves and dotes on her so much. And you can see that. And you can see he did that with Susie Q after they got married. When he loves someone, he jumps in head first. Damn the torpedoes, damn the consequences.
And you can tell by that time of Star Wars Crusaders, Susie Q's more of the patriarch of the household because of his actions.
And that's exactly it. And so when he does love, and he doesn't think about the consequences. And that's not to say he doesn't love his wife enough because he does stray. And I am not justifying cheating by any means. We could have an entire argument, but that is not the realm of pop culture. If you want to deal with that in pop culture, put it in the comments and we'll figure it out. But nevertheless, because he is that loving individual, and when he does love so much, this is where he meets Josuke's mom, has this very short, it sounds like it's a short affair of maybe a few months.
It was a few months affair while he was teaching them.
Which Josuke's mom loved Joseph. Really did, which I have to admit, if it was Patrick Stewart levels, I'd probably understand, but nevertheless, there is that element there, and I would say to Joseph, while we do get a great character out of it, so I can't take that away, if you feel compelled to stray, then you need to think about who you're hurting, because it's kind of like when you're abusing someone. Because I think of cheating, even though I've done it and have done it to me, not to Marcus, so Kaiji Okami, you all know his real name. Not that I've ever done that to him, but when I was younger, we've all made those mistakes. but you have to think about everyone else you're hurting.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that Joseph really needed to remember. But, as I said, if he didn't do it, we wouldn't have Josuke.
Yeah. On top of that, it didn't get out till 15 years after.
Oh, yeah. And when it gets out, Suikyu is my girl. I'm sorry. She proves why she is
The patriarch of that household.
Yes. And when you first meet the woman, you think she's
A ditz.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 nuts shy of a car, but yeah. So, after looking at Joseph Joestar, we're going to go to our final Joestar. And I know I kind of briefly mentioned, but the reason I do call him a Joestar is because, one, his father's never around, because he's a traveling musician, and apparently he's a popular musician. I have no idea who he is, though. And 2, I think if Joseph had his way, his daughter would have kept her last name, and Jotaro would have kept the Joestar name.
Yeah, you definitely could see that would have been the way.
You can see that, because I really think Joseph wanted the Joestar name to live on, but unfortunately it didn't, which that is the nature of the world. So, Jotaro Kuja, I'll let you start this one.
Jotaro, when you first meet him, you're like, okay, is this kid gonna be the rambunctious, dirty badass that we just come to love from the 80s that epitomized this era, especially with it taking place in 1986? And then you meet him, and he tells his mother to screw off, bitch, and you're just like, whoa, 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 and then Holly going, okay, dear, and you're just like, jaw-dropping, like, what the heck is with this character?
And what scares me is and that's the first thing I saw, too. So when I saw this, 80s kids in America, if you were not born in the 80s, or if you had different experiences in the 80s, which is certainly fine, I know I can say, if I disrespected an adult, there was a slap in the face, there was a slap on the ass, there was a spanking, there were many, many, many things. I was raised to call everyone Miss something, like Miss Ann, or Miss Susan, or Mr. Clark, or whatever. You were super, in the 80s, kids were raised to be super flippin' respectful.
Exactly.
And when you see a kid that was from the 80s, even though we're watching this in the 2000s, you're still thinking that 80s child motif of like, you did what?
And you're literally looking, it's like, no, if I would have said that in that era, I would have been outside getting my butt whipped.
I would have been dead. I was an 80s kid, and I told my mom to screw you. I ran. I didn't stay in a fixed location as he did in the jail cell. I booked it. So, watching this, even as an adult, thinking back to your childhood, you're like, no, I would have been dead, gone, buried. And then having the mom say, okay, dear, oh my god.
And it really goes to show Jotaro's growing up with a father who's always on the road and a mother who babied him, turned it into a compassionate person when it comes to his family, but to everybody else, he's a complete jerk.
He is, and it took a little bit. It took probably about 4 episodes for me to see this. And what really made me see this was actually when he was fighting Kakuin in the school.
Against the nurse.
And he did everything in his power to prevent the nurse from being hurt more than she already was. If he just did, because Joseph, as much as I adore Joseph probably would not have had, even though he is intelligent, he would have not had enough of the compassion to save her. And that's not a dig against him, it's just, he didn't have that in him, where Jotaro, his mom is extremely fragile. She's an extremely strong woman at the same time. I imagine there's many layers that they don't demonstrate, but she is very soft, very muted and calm. And to have a very tough son, one is an extreme rarity because that does not happen very often. And two, it just shows that he has that protective nature. He is, I wouldn't say egotistical, because I was going back and forth on this.
He's confident in his abilities.
He is confident, and he knows himself. That is the one thing I would say. If you look at the progression of the Joestars, Jonathan knew who he wanted to be. Joseph had plans and eventually succeeded to what he wanted to be. But it took work. Jotaro knew what he wanted to be from a young age and just did it. There was no...
Two stand fights epitomized Jotaro actually knowing his limits to the max, and it wasn't Dio. It was against Yellow Temperance and Steely Dan.
Yes, very true. And I would say compared to Jonathan and Joseph, Jotaro, he did not to say he was stagnant, but he didn't grow as a character. You just saw him more as who he was. One thing that really reflected to me, outside of just the battles, because Steely Dan and Yellow Temperance were epitomizing experiences, was also when they were on the boat, and I use quotations because it wasn't a boat, it was a stand.
It was strength.
It was a strength stand. But when he's talking to Suzy Q, and everyone's freaking out. His grandfather's freaking out because, once again, Joseph is super extra.
Twice, too. Also when they were in the submarine against the High Priestess.
Yes.
The other time against
against the High Priestess as well. Everyone is losing their minds. And he is just... I heard this quote, never understood it until probably about 6 months ago. He's like water off a duck's back. Never understood that meant that he treats everything like water off a duck's back. And I literally am an idiot savant because I had no clue. And I was like, oh, that sounds funny. That makes no sense. But literally it's because ducks don't hold water onto them. Everything just slides off. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. But nevertheless, he is very calm. He's very confident. There are certain times that he is too confident. But not ever once is it too confident to the detriment of another human being. Because when he is gambling, there is an episode where he is fighting against two stand users who are younger and older brothers. And...
No, that wasn't him. That was Paul Raff. It was when he had to deal with the one that was the gambler himself.
Yes, the gambler himself. And he is losing. He is getting his ass handed to him.
And but it also shows intelligence to figure out that there was more to meets the eye, and there was a cheat going on in the background.
Well, yes, he's intelligent. But then again, thinking about it, all of the Joestars are intelligent their own way. He's intelligent. I wouldn't say it's intellect.
It's street smarts.
Yes, absolutely, it's street smarts. Because he goes one step further than Joseph does, if you think about it, where he does also come from wealth. He comes from money. He comes from that. But he goes even a step further, and rather than just not using the wealth and hanging out with less than ideal individuals, he actually goes into the streets, and that's where he learns about the world.
Something that neither Joseph or Jonathan ever attempted to do, which he did.
And it's a very smart thing to do, because I think everyone, I'm not telling anyone to go out into the middle of a bad neighborhood and try to figure a way out of it. Please don't, because I don't want you to die. I've been there. But street smarts are so important. There are two types of smarts in this world: book smart and street smart. Book smart was Jonathan.
By a long shot.
Jonathan is the epitome of book smart. He was incredibly intelligent. Not that he didn't have a lot of physicality or anything like that. Then you go to street smart on this, which Joseph is both together. Then you go to Jotaro, who is epitomizing street smart. He knows how to handle any situation. And it even helps when dealing with characters like Oingo Boingo.
Which he only had to deal with part of that. Unfortunately, somebody else who needs a therapy chatter session got to deal with the full brunt of that with Polnareff.
Many characters need therapy sessions. We could probably do an entire year of just JoJo's characters. But with Jotaro, not that he's perfect in every way, because he is not Mary Poppins. I think he actually, once you see him in Diamond is Unbreakable with his part 4 of the Bizarre Adventure
Which we
series.
actually should go a little into that, because you actually see how he progressed and actually accomplished the book smart aspect as an adult.
He does, because the so Diamond is Unbreakable is 13 years after. 13, because it was only 6 months that, or no, not 6 months, 2 months that it dealt with for Stardust.
2 months for Stardust, and then it's 13 years later, 86 to 99.
Yeah, 86 to 99. And seeing that 13-year gap where you have a 16-year-old kid going into being a 29-year-old adult, he has progressed to being part of the Speedwagon Foundation, which every Joestar essentially is.
He's working on his PhD in marine biology.
Which makes sense after he dealt with everything with Anne and all that stuff. But, he also is an incredibly responsible person. While he is not the jump in headfirst love like his grandfather is, I would say he has elements of of compassion like his great-great-grandfather. Because when the point of the start of this story is they're going through their wills. Because Joseph is
79 years old and getting to that point where it's like you're going to think about your mortality.
Well, he also is starting to lose some of his faculties. People may call it senility. It's actually, watching the show, I have to say the creator of it really did a great example of the elements of dementia and Alzheimer's. And somebody who worked in healthcare, you see it and you can see how it hurts everyone. So Susie Q looked into different things because being a wife, she wants to take care of her husband, found out he had an affair that he hid. Obviously, she went off the handle, which I don't blame her. Nevertheless, there was a child from it. So he goes out there to assess who is going to be another inheritor of this fortune. He wanted to not take it away from him, but just to understand who his uncle is, so to speak. So it's an element of he is doing something to protect his family, but he also wants to see how the family evolves. And so you see him, and this is why I say, whereas the other two, whereas Joseph at least, you see him grow throughout the series as a character. Jotaro, he is still Jotaro. Yeah. He is a more calm version of himself, but the confidence is still there. The ego is still there.
He still knows his limitations when it comes to fighting. He still knows his limitations on what he can do.
And he also has become this big brother sort. Because when he's working with other characters,
Koichi mostly.
Koichi is a great example. Koichi, who is my favorite character of Diamond is Unbreakable, because he's basically Dragon Ball Z, everything all together. He's the kid who is he's the tiniest kid who might as well have been bullied, comes out of his shell, but he's also that incredible, he is the perfect example of an idiot savant, except he's dumb as a brick. So when Koichi is trying to build his own confidence and become a stronger person, you see Jotaro, same thing with Josuke and everyone else, he becomes that bigger brother. He becomes that responsible adult where he actually pays it forward.
Yeah.
So everything he learned from Abdal, Polnareff, Kakyoin, he kind of pays it off to pass it on to the next generation, so to speak, even though he's still young.
Especially and the 29-year-old, of the two 29-year-old adults in the Diamonds Unbreakable, he's the only one that's responsible of the two.
Yeah, we're not going to go there.
We are not going to go in with the manga artist.
No, we will never go into the manga artist. Not that he's bad or anything, but just because that would be way too much. But, so the one thing I've always adored about this particular character as a therapy chair session is he is probably the only character in JoJo's Bizarre Adventures universe who does not need therapy.
He is set. He knows where he's going to go. He does not need to sit in the therapy chair. And matter of fact, he might be the one in the therapy chair giving advice to the other characters.
He might be the one in the therapy chair giving advice to us. No, and that's the one thing I respect about him as a character is even as a teenager, I think one thing that he learned how to be, using his street smarts, using his ability of the compassion he's inherited through, I would say, osmosis from the rest of his family or just genetics, he is a perfect counterbalance. Because he's the perfect counterbalance for his mother. The reason he said, screw you, Mom, to his mom is because he did not know what was happening with this stand, and he wanted to create this barrier between himself and his mother to protect her because he loved her so much. With his grandfather during Stardust Crusaders, he became this counterbalance of his grandfather only has the ability to take pictures and see the future. He has the ability to power through and figure out how to do this. For Kakyoin, he goes through this fear that everything is going to end because he cannot live up to what he has been tricked into doing. Jotaro finds a way to make it right. Same thing with helping Polnareff. Same thing with helping Abdal and Annie and everyone.
Yeah. And in a way, Abdal also worked as a mentor and a teacher for Jotaro in the same way as well.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I really value when we get to the three core Joestars, is we have almost the... I'm trying to think of the calmest of all the Zodiacs. I would probably say... It's probably going to be like the Aquarius, Capricorn. Those are usually a little bit more of the calmer ones. Then you have the Taurus, which is Joseph Joestar.
And actually, if you look up on the wiki, his birthday is a Taurus.
He is bullheaded to the extreme. And then you come to Jotaro, who is the perfect embodiment of what you call a Libra. So balanced in how he handles everything, or even a Gemini, Libra, both between the two zodiac signs, even if he's not in either of them, that's what he represents. A Gemini is a perfect example of knowing how to flip a switch to be whatever a person needs you to see, whereas a Libra knows how to balance it between yourself and another.
With me being a Libra, I need things to be in a constant state of balance, otherwise I go off the rails and my mind goes 100 different places.
Exactly. And that's kind of the big thing that you really see from this, is you need to see how the characters relate to you. And Jotaro, I am not saying he epitomizes what we should all look for in another human being. I'm not saying that by any means, because he does come across as a dick.
He's a brash person, very brash.
But he is the person that, if you're trying to see how to emulate something or someone in pop culture, he is a great example of just taking a breath, being calm, and reflecting on who you are. I would say, even if he doesn't meditate, and meditation does not mean sitting with your legs crossed and closing your eyes and saying Om. It means just having whatever calms you. It could be staring at a television watching TV shows, it could be playing a video game, whatever puts you into that zen, utilizing that to think about yourself. Yeah. And that is, I think, if anything for a therapy chair comment for him, that would be my take.
And he'd be one of the few fictional characters where, because of his brashness, and he's going to tell it to you, the way he sees it, and not going to hold back, he is the one person, even though you're probably not going to like the advice, he's going to give you the exact advice you need to hear.
Yes, he does not sugarcoat anything. And as a human being, in the real world, as much as it hurts, you want that. You want it from your doctors. You want it from your teachers. You want it from your employers. Why wouldn't you want it from someone who's a friend? And pop culture is, like with anything else, there's always that pop culture element that finally gives you what you want in the real world in a fictional place.
Exactly. And I feel that's probably the best place to end this episode.
I know! JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is awesome, and hopefully we've proven it to you as well of why JoJo's is a great series and why these characters are awesome. So please join us next time where we're going to have a short episode on spoilers in pop culture and how we hate them.
Or how some of us don't.